A special exhaustive look from the iDino project, an alleged human ancestor, and a challenge regarding radiometric dating. This is Genesis Week. And welcome to this special episode of Genesis Week, the weekly program of creationary commentary on news, views, and events pertaining to the Origins controversy, made possible by you, the supporters of Core Ottawa. Excellence in pirate broadcasting. We snuck into the abandoned Cyprus airport and set up our studio so we could continue to bring you the information the anti-creationists don't want you to see or hear, and we give glory to our creator while doing it. Remember, if you get lost in cyberspace, you can head on over to our brand spanking new website, genesisweek.com, to catch the most recent show, Crevo rants, full interviews with our guests, and now news bites and commentary from guest authors. Be sure to check it out. I'm your host, Ian Juby. Please join me. The longest-running peer-reviewed science journal with a creationary focus, the Creation Research Society Quarterly magazine, had a special edition expounding upon the iDino project. The iDino project was an acronym for Investigation of Dinosaur Intact Natural Osteotissue, a study started by the Creation Research Society examining the stunning repeated finds of intact dinosaur soft tissues found in dinosaur bones. Now, while multiple papers have already been published documenting the results of these studies, CRS devoted the entire latest issue of the quarterly to the iDino research, and, as expected, the finds were absolutely stunning. The whole point of the iDino project was to verify or refute a creationary proposition. We are proposing that preserved soft tissues is actually commonplace in the fossil record. Now, you need to understand, what's been found is soft tissues like tendons, muscle, collagen fibers, blood vessels complete with red blood cells in them, and apparently even preserved DNA. The first paper was by Brian Thomas discussing the discovery of preserved soft tissues, not just in dinosaur bones, but throughout the entire fossil record. Such finds have been reported for literally decades. Thomas proposed a clarification with which I would agree, and I will personally use from here on out, including on this program. The term preserved soft tissue is often used for impressions of soft tissues preserved in the rock record, not the preservation of soft tissue itself. So Thomas proposes the term original biomaterials to specifically refer to soft tissues that are still intact within a fossil. Many of you longtime viewers will remember the reports by evolutionist Dr. Mary Schweitzer, who reported basically T-Rex meat, still preserved within the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. Meat you could stretch, let it go, and it would return to its original shape. Tens of millions of years old? I think not. She also found preserved blood in blood vessels. But as we pointed out on this show before, this was hardly new information. Reports of dinosaur blood had been reported as early as the 1920s, but all of this should come as no surprise if, as Thomas points out, the fossil record allegedly older than the dinosaurs also has preserved original biomaterials. Thomas first shows that biological degradation is far, far too fast for any original biomaterials to stick around for even 1 million years, let alone tens of millions of years, let alone more unstable biomaterials such as DNA. Thomas shows the actual measured biological decay rates presented in multiple papers. He then ventures into preserved original biomaterials found from the Cenozoic layers. Those would be layers assigned to an age anywhere from 2.6 to 65.5 million evolutionary years. Now, of course, this is where the vast majority of the original biomaterials are reported, and includes the woolly mammoths of Siberia and multiple animals so diverse the Siberia was described as having a diversity found only in the Serengeti of Africa. Many of those Siberian fossil animals had original biomaterials preserved. Thomas then focuses on the Mesozoic, assigned an evolutionary age of 65 million to 180 million years ago. Now, contrary to what most scientists think, preserved original biomaterials from the fossil record have been reported in the scientific literature for decades. And Thomas takes some in time to speculate why it is that so few scientists know this. Presumably, one of the reasons is investigator bias. The investigators, being of an evolutionary mindset, aren't expecting to find preserved original biomatter. So even when they do see it, they don't recognize it. Many decades of scientific literature reports original biomaterials preserved in dinosaurs, acetosaurs, including skin color and pigments, skin scales and hemoglobin from a mosasaur, proteins found in the bones of a sauropod embryo, and of course, Schweitzer's discovery of what can loosely be described as T-Rex meat, blood vessels complete with blood cells, and osteocytes or bone cells, which had markers for preserved DNA within them as well. And of course, many of you longtime viewers will remember we had creationary researcher Mark Armitage on the show in Season 2, where he showed us entire sheets of osteocytes found from the horn of our Triceratops, excavated from the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. The second paper in CRSQ Special iDinosaur issue was a second report from Armitage, who found more bone osteocytes, this time in the brow horn of a Triceratops, from the Hell Creek Formation. And this is all hardly an exhaustive list. This is only a small sampling of the reports, all published in peer-reviewed science journals. Thomas then went into original biomaterials found in fossils from the Paleozoic, or rocks assigned evolutionary ages of 251 million to 542 million years ago. Now, while the examples are fewer, you can still find reports in the scientific literature, such as collagen in graptolites allegedly 460 million years old. Now, while Thomas didn't bring this up in his paper, you'll recall in our Toad You So episode of Genesis Week, where we discussed toads and mollusks excavated from Ordovician limestones during the construction of the Erie Canal. Multiple reports of these toads reanimating, waking up out of hibernation when they were released from this solid rock, allegedly 460 million years old. Multiple eyewitnesses reported seeing these toads move, and some even living for several days before dying. The mollusks were also still alive. Now, while some are skeptical of the reports that the toads actually reanimated, no one is arguing that these ancient toads were fossils, that is, turned to stone. So obviously we're talking about a lot of preserved original biomaterials. In fact, every single part of the toad is preserved, including its DNA, in rock layers alleged to be 460 million years old. Thomas brings up multiple examples of original biomaterials in allegedly old rocks, including various parts of the eye, preserved in an arthropod alleged to be 520 million years old. And of course, Thomas brings up the spectacular find of still flexible marine tube worm tubes assigned to the Ediacaran era, around 550 million evolutionary years. The researchers themselves state that none of the tubes had been replaced by minerals. It was all preserved original biomatter. Also of interest, 550 million years of evolution has caused the ciboglanid tube worms to evolve into ciboglanid tube worms. There is no evolution, no change. Why not? This is consistent with creation, where the Creator said 10 times in the first chapter of Genesis that He created life to reproduce after its kind. Here we see the ciboglanid tube worms faithfully reproducing after their kind. It is an understatement to say that all of this original biomatter cannot be preserved for tens or hundreds of millions of years. To argue that it somehow has remained preserved for all that time is to contradict every bit of actual science and scientific study which shows that biomatter decays fast. At absolute most, a couple of 100,000 years. And that's being very generous. Needless to say, while these numerous, spectacular examples of original biomaterials present an in-the-face challenge to an old Earth, a young Earth, as indicated in the Bible, and by multiple dating methods, has no problem with preserved original biomatter in the fossil record. One response by the Old Earth community in what can only be described as an action of desperation was to discount the dinosaur blood vessels and red blood cells as biofilm. Biofilm would be leftover slime from modern bacteria which presumably were contaminating a fossil for who knows how long. Now, while Schweitzer refuted this nonsense previously, it is the third iDino article, Dr. Kevin Anderson, who revisits this argument and further refutes it by showing that the proteins of biofilms do not even vaguely resemble the blood vessels and red blood cells that have been found in dinosaur bones. The fifth iDino paper was by geologist Dr. Timothy Clarey on the Hell Creek Formation, a world-renowned dinosaur graveyard in northern US and southern Canada. Clarey goes into tremendous detail about the formation, showing that it was a gigantic watery catastrophe that killed these dinosaurs and made the formation. Gee, that's what I said. Check out Creevo Rant number 17, Dinosaurs and Asteroids, which focused on another famous dinosaur graveyard in Alberta, but showed the exact same evidence. Marine fossils prevalent throughout the formation, including sharks, clams, gastropods, fish, etc. Dinosaur remains are found above what is called the KT boundary, or the layer that has the iridium from the alleged asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, showing that if the iridium was from an asteroid, the asteroid isn't what killed the dinosaurs. Other features of the formation include water-formed crossbeds and wave ripples, all pointing to tsunami-like waves transporting ocean waters onto the continent, killing the dinosaurs, mixing them with marine animals, and making the Hell Creek Formation. Gee, that sounds an awful lot like a worldwide flood to me. The fourth iDino paper by DeMassa and Boudreaux discussed the attempts by the Old Earth community to shoehorn the data into an old Earth. The Old Earthers have concocted several theories as to how original biomatter could be preserved over, say, 100 million years, in spite of the science, not because of it. While the authors show that these attempts fail miserably to explain preservation of original biomatter over 100 million years, they make two significant points. One, if one simply removes the assumption of deep time, then the data makes complete sense and falls in line with well-established scientific studies of biodegradation. Everything lines up. Two, if we have original biomatter, then we also have the original carbon, seeing as how the biomatter is composed of hydrocarbons. If we have original carbon, that means fossils can be dated by carbon-14, which brings us to the sixth iDino paper by Thomas and Nelson. Thomas and Nelson point out how, because of the radioactive decay of carbon-14 over time, any sample over 100,000 years old should contain 0 carbon-14. Yet that is not what is found. Thomas and Nelson conducted a study involving 16 different samples of fossils taken from the Cenozoic right through to the Paleozoic. The samples included fish from the Green River Formation, dinosaur bones from the Hell Creek Formation, Lance Formation, and the Horseshoe Canyon Formation. Mummified wood from the Canadian High Arctic was also sampled, allegedly 40 million years old, yet you could cut it with a saw, run your fingernail into it, and even burn it. Another sample was mummified fruit from allegedly 11 million year old coal seams, fruit that still emitted a fruit smell. All total, the samples had assigned ages from 11 million to 290 million evolutionary years. Yet all of the samples returned high quantities of carbon-14. If you use conventional calculations based on the carbon-14, carbon-12 ratios, the samples returned radiocarbon ages of under 18,000 years old to a maximum of 49,000 years old. The carbon-14 dates disagree with the assigned evolutionary ages by almost 6,000 times. Note that no one is saying that the radiocarbon ages are correct, but rather Thomas and Nelson are simply pointing out that the consistent presence of high amounts of carbon-14 in samples taken from throughout the fossil record shows that all of the fossil record was laid down recently and at the same time, geologically speaking. Geologically speaking, the carbon-14 ages suggest it all happened yesterday. Again, this all lines up with a biblical account of a young Earth and a global flood which laid down the fossil record only a few thousand years ago. Now, one might argue, hey, but those carbon-14 ages of 18,000 years is still longer than what your Bible says the Earth has been around. True, but there's more to the picture as carbon-14 ages still involve assumptions. But if I'm wrong, then my age of the Earth might be out by a factor of 2 or 3. Your age is off by a factor of 6,000. I'm willing to accept the carbon-14 ages if you are. This ties in with our next major story of the week, the discovery of an alleged Ape Man ancestor, Homo naledi. I was absolutely flooded by viewers writing in asking about this find, which had much media fanfare. Now, this particular fossil find is spectacular and has a fun story behind its discovery. The bones were found in a deep cave, accessible only by really skinny people who did not have claustrophobia, as they had to crawl through a cave with a mere 25 centimeters or 10 inches of clearance. They then had to drop through an equally narrow vertical shaft into the naledi chamber, where the bones were found. Over the course of 3 weeks, some 1,550 bones were removed, representing an estimated 15 individuals, all buried in essentially one spot, in a dirt a mere 6 inches or 15 centimeters thick. They were pretty much all in one spot and were virtually devoid of any other kind of fossil animal or wood or debris, indicating the creatures weren't put there by, say, a flash flood. The most likely explanation is that the bodies were put there, dropped down the vertical shaft where they collected over centuries. So, just what did they find? The claims are that it was human, hence the designation Homo naledi. Multiple evolutionists, upon reviewing the bones, argued that this creature does not deserve its own species designation, and certainly did not fall within the Homo classification. Rather, they believe the fossils are simply representatives of the already well-known Australopithecines. The brain size, the jaw, the curved fingers and toes are all indicative of an ape. Other evolutionary scientists are contending that the vast number of bones actually represent multiple species, and thus the bones put together make a chimera, not an actual representation of the creature. Berger and team heavily played up the unusual collection of bones to imply that there was ritual involved in the disposition of the bodies. They argued that there was no other entrance into the cave, no indication that there ever was another entrance, no indication that a flood could have swept the bodies into the cave, and the fact that the remains of only one other animal were found in there indicates a systematic ritualistic dumping of bodies into the naledi chamber. This implies consciousness of mortality, and humans are the only ones to exhibit rituals of burying their dead. Ergo, naledi exhibits the strangely human trait of ritualistic burying their dead in a nearly inaccessible cave. Now here's what is interesting, is that evolutionary scientists are balking at this contention, arguing that it's simply a ridiculous suggestion. But I would like to point out something even more plausible that probably all evolutionary scientists would miss because of their evolutionary presuppositions. Like the tools found with other hominids, they assume the tools were used by the hominids. They are assuming that modern humans were not around because they had not yet evolved at the time the naledi corpses were dropped into the cave. The most likely culprit for ritualistic burial of anything is us. Completely modern humans. There's nothing indicating that naledi was human, and like in other hominid fossil finds, one can conclude modern man may have in fact been there. But the biggest point to be made about the report is that mysteriously Berger didn't attempt to date the fossils. Even to evolutionists, the age of the fossils are crucial to the interpretation. Imagine trying to plot out the nice fancy chart of ape to man like this, only to find out the age of one of the guys in the middle was completely wrong. So why did Berger not attempt to date the fossils? I think we know why, but rather than speculate, let's try to set the record straight, shall we? The description of the excavation sounds a lot more like the excavation of World War II battleground, rather than a 2 million year old fossil site. Clearly, there was original biomaterial present in the fossils, and thus there is obviously carbon within them. I lay an open challenge to the naledi team. Provide a sample of the fossils for carbon-14 dating, and we here at Genesis Week will arrange paying for the carbon-14 tests to be conducted. I will even step out and make a prediction. I'm guessing that there will be so much carbon-14 in these bones that the UN will want to impose the new carbon tax on Homo naledi. I predict that carbon-14 tests will return an age magnitudes younger than the assigned assumed age of 2.5 million years old, and it will in fact turn out to be just a few thousand years old. So, are you guys game? Let me know. You can email us at comments@genesisweek.com to make arrangements, or you can send us a tweet at GenesisWeek. Alright, stick around, we'll be back in just a minute.
Oh, not again!
To the horror of both fans and enemies, Ian Juby is back with more ranting goodness.
Okay, Jacques. You first.
Just when you thought his meds had kicked in, Ian goes off on a tangent about what killed the dinosaurs. The origin of life, defining evolution, and yes, even sex. It wasn't enough for an R rating, but nowadays, what is? Volume 4 of his ever-popular and ever-hated Kurivo Rants has 8 new short, fast, funny, and hard-hitting episodes. You can get your copy on the soon-to-be-extinct DVD for $15 plus shipping and handling, or purchase the instant digital download of all 8 tracks for just $8. Or you can buy all 4 volumes of his world-infamous rants for the price of 3. Order your copies today and have a party with, like, popcorn and stuff. Visit Ian's bookstore today.
Woohoo! Mail for me?
Carl wrote in on Facebook asking for a response to some skeptics in an online debate he was having. Hello Ian, can you answer this? Creationists, on the other hand, must explain to us how sediment and rock laid down in a mere year can yield such fantastic, orderly differences in radiometric ages. This poses a fatal problem whether one believes in the accuracy of radiometric dating or not. One would think that the flood sediments, gathered from the 4 corners of the old antediluvian world, and their associated igneous rock, formed during the flood, would all register very little radiometric age. At the very least, we would expect random fluctuations if the radiometric date methods were totally at sea. Why should the percentage of lead to uranium and zircon crystals, the key to ordinary uranium-lead radiometric dating, depend on which geologic period they are found in? If most of the geologic column were created during Noah's flood, would it really matter whether a zircon crystal was found in a Cambrian strata or Cretaceous strata, in Jurassic strata or Tertiary strata? Noah's flood might just as easily deposit the same crystal in one place as another. I've seen all of your videos and I do not have an answer to that simple fact. Best regards, Carol. Well, thanks for writing in, Carl. First of all, we need to correct several misunderstandings the original poster had. The fantastic orderly differences in radiometric ages are only orderly because of the system. If a radio date does not line up with the assumed evolutionary age, the date is assumed to be incorrect and is tossed out. So of course, you are only left with orderly dates. Now I could give you countless examples of disorderly radio dates, especially when using radio dating methods on rocks of which we do know the age, such as the Uinkaret lava flows in Grand Canyon. We know the lavas are 800 to 1,000 years old because there is Indian artifacts in the lavas. Yet the battery of radio dating methods applied to the lavas returned ages of between 10,000 years old and 2.6 billion years old. A spread of ages different by a factor of 260,000 on rocks we know are 1/10 the age of the youngest radio date obtained. So when the skeptic says at the very least we should expect random fluctuations, well, you do get the fluctuations. It's the filtering of the dates by those protecting an old Earth that gets rid of the fluctuations and only leaves behind what appears to be orderly dates. They toss out all 13 of these disorderly radio dating tests because they don't line up. If they do that for rocks of which we do know the age, how on earth can we trust the radio dates of rocks for which we do not know the age? Further to that, Dr. Robert Gentry, way back in 1976, noticed radio halos in coal. Now, radio halos are rings of radiation damage surrounding a radioactive material. In this case, the wood was laid down in a flood, absorbed uranium that was in the water, and the uranium started producing these spheres of radiation damage within the wood. The wood was then compressed into coal, squished the radio halos. The uranium then continued making more spheres of radiation damage, which remained unsquished. Gentry obtained these samples from the Triassic, Jurassic, and Eocene, layers spanning evolutionary ages of 37 to 245 million years. That's a time span of 208 million evolutionary years. The problem was that the new unsquished radio halos were the product of only a few thousand years of radioactivity. What does this mean? This means that 208 million evolutionary years of the fossil record was compressed into one event, only a few thousand years ago. So if you want to use radioactivity to argue for an old Earth, why don't you use this radiodating method? Interestingly, the skeptic brought up zircon crystals and the uranium-lead ratios contained within them. The uranium within the crystals breaks down into lead via radioactivity over time. For every uranium atom that breaks down into lead, the process releases 8 helium atoms. So if you can picture it, it's like a little helium generator inside this solid crystal. The helium leaks out at a very slow rate, a rate that is measurable. So if we count how much uranium and lead there is, estimate how much helium has been produced, measure how slow it's leaking out, and how much helium is still left, we can estimate the age of those crystals. The RATE team conducted this study on zircons extracted from granite alleged to be 2 billion years old. They charted 2 predictions: the leaking rate of a crystal 2 billion years old and leaking rate of a crystal a mere 6,000 years old. Notice that the 2 predictions are different by 100,000 times. When the actual leakage rates were measured, it was bang on the young Earth creation predictions. Prediction is the most powerful action you can take when testing a scientific theory. In one fell swoop, the RATE team demonstrated 2 things. 1, these basement rocks were not 2 billion years old, but rather were 6,000 years old. And 2, the radioactive decay rates in the past were faster, thus invalidating pretty much all of the radiodating methods. If the skeptic wants to bring up zircon crystals and uranium-lead radiodating methods, well, he's got to answer this research. Okay, I hope that helps, Carl. Based on radiodating methods, we can only conclude the Earth is actually young, just like what the Bible says. Wonder what else the Bible's right about. Okay, I gotta run. I'm your host, Ian Juby, saying ta-ta for now. I hope you'll join me again next Genesis Week. Remember, you can send us your questions, comments, love mail, and the code to the front door of Fort Knox to us in a number of ways. Remember those words of warning and comfort from our Creator, the Lord Jesus Christ, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me." We'll see you on the flip side.
We are a viewer-supported program and need your support to keep this program on the air. Please pray for us, and if you wish to financially support the program, Canadians can make a tax-deductible donation to Core Ottawa, Canada North Post Office Box 72075, Ottawa, Ontario, K2K 2P4. While we cannot offer tax-deductible receipts outside of Canada, donors wishing to financially support the program can do so online at ianjuby.org/donations, and thank you for your support.